wisdom rather than trust trail, relying on God's wisdom. Jacob knew God. He knew how God had led his grandfather Abraham from the land where he was born to an unknown land, a land that God promised to give their family. Jacob would have been taught this growing up. However, Jacob chose not to trust God with his life. He trusted himself instead. It wasn't enough for Jacob just to know about God. Jacob needed to make the decision to let God lead his life too. Jacob had false idols. We've talked about that the last couple of weeks. Jacob's false idols were his favored family. First Rachel, then Joseph, and later on Benjamin. He relied upon these favored few to provide for his happiness, his needs for love, satisfaction, and significance. This was a broken cistern. If you remember our lesson from last week, a cistern was a big hole dug out of the ground and lined with plaster, and it was supposed to hold water in times of drought. Well, Jacob's plan looked like it would hold water, but in time it failed. Other people cannot be God in our life. They can love us, they can bring good things, but they do not have the power to protect us or provide for us. Only God has that kind of power. As we've already seen, Rachel died in childbirth. Obviously, Jacob had no way of preventing that tragedy. That devastated him. But instead of choosing to trust God at that point in his life, he simply appointed another false idol. He put Joseph in that place, and Joseph became his false idol. And later on, we'll see that Jacob does it a third time. After Joseph is gone, he just appoints the next brother, Benjamin, to take his place. False idols don't work. It was fine for Jacob to love his wife and his kids, but Jacob needed to love all of his children, to make room in his heart for the entire family, not just a couple of them. Jacob needed to give God the job of protecting his life and his heart, not his family members who could not fulfill that role. Jacob came to temptation crossroads, and he chose pride pathway. He went his own way. He didn't go God's way. Instead of letting God fill the loneliness in his heart when Rachel died, that was devastating pain for him. But instead of doing that, he just turned to another false idol, to Joseph. False idols feel good and feel satisfying for a time, but they always fail us given enough time in the end. No one can be God except God. Pride was Jacob's problem. He trusted in his own thoughts and ideas and did not choose God's way. Jacob thinks he can handle things himself. And guess who picks up on that prideful way of living? His son Joseph. God did have special plans for Joseph, as we'll see in part 2. Next week we're going to cover that part of his story in a man named Joseph. But while Joseph is still a teen, likely 17 years old at this part of the story, God gives him 2 dreams. In both of the dreams, his brothers are bowing down to him and worshiping him. And Joseph makes the decision to tell everybody about it, to tell the brothers about it. I just don't think that's going to go over very well. What do you think? And it appears that Joseph is relishing in the moment, that he's kind of lording it over his family. Look at me. You know, I'm going to be the leader over everybody. As if the brothers don't have enough to deal with already, with Dad continually favoring Joseph. But now he's having these dreams. And they are bowing down to Joseph. I mean, can you imagine if you have one, little sister, your little brother coming to you and say, you know what, when you grow up, I'm going to be the boss of you. I'm going to be your leader. I mean, No sibling is going to handle that very well. It would certainly invite hostility. I mean, it's so messy. Humbly keeping these dreams to himself might have been a better decision, but he shares them with the family. So at 17, Joseph comes to Temptation Crossroads, and this is his painful event. My brothers hate me and torment me. He came by that honestly. He inherited that. It was not his fault. But the question Joseph had to answer at Temptation Crossroads was, will I serve God by not trying to get back at my brothers and instead forgive them for their bad behavior toward me and let God heal me? That was Joseph's question. The other question was, or will I serve myself by lording my elevated status over them, gloating over these dreams? That was his other question. And like we all do at one time or another, because all human beings choose pride pathway at times, that was Joseph's pick. We'll see in a moment that the consequences from that decision was that he was sold into slavery by his brothers. The stage is now set for the event that will change his life forever and bust this family apart. So one morning, Jacob presents Joseph with a coat he specially made for him, a stunning coat with many colors. The problem is, only Joseph gets one. It's like Christmas morning, and there's only one present, and Joseph gets it. Soon after that, the 10 brothers are sent out to tend to the family flocks. They're away for an extended time when Dad decides to send Joseph out to check on the brothers. This kid who's 20 years younger than some of these boys, the kid who can't even grow a beard yet, he's sent to check on the brothers. I mean, the wounding just never stops. Joseph is elevated above them again, and the brothers keep getting fuel added to their fire. And while he's still quite a ways off, the brothers see him. So let's pick it up in Genesis. Turn in your Bibles to Genesis 37, and we're going to read this part of the story. Genesis 37:18. First book of the Bible, Genesis 37, verse 18. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So we'll pause there for a moment. So the boys saw their opportunity and they seized the moment. No one was watching. Dad would never find out. They ripped that beautiful coat off of Joseph and they threw him in to this dry cistern. As we learned last week, they're supposed to hold water, but this one was dry. Their first intention is to outright murder his brother. But Reuben, the oldest, intervened and said he would not allow them to kill him. So they decided to just leave him there to die. Their own brother. And that just shows you how much they hated Joseph. Their unhealed wounds from their father had taken over their mind and their thoughts and their actions. The brothers came by their wounds honestly. It was Jacob, their father, who created these wounds. He chose to withhold his love and withhold his approval of the boys. And they needed that approval. They needed that love for him. Those wounds were not their fault. Yes, the boys had made lots of mistakes, but who doesn't? But the father could never forgive the boys for the mistakes that they had made, and so they couldn't forgive themselves. Jacob openly judged these 10 brothers as failures, and the boys were full of shame. These are their honest wounds. Some of them have been inflicted by Jacob. Some of them have been inflicted by their own poor choices. And this is what caused their rage toward Joseph. It was simply safer to see Joseph as the source of their problems rather than face their true fear that they did not have their father's love. The painful event that brought the 10 brothers to temptation crossroads was this: the lack of love and approval from their father. The question they had to answer was this: will I serve God and take my anger and hurt to him and let him heal me? Or will I serve myself, react out of my wound, and do evil to Joseph? They chose pride pathway. They became their own God, and they ended up with a life of misery. This pain would never leave the brothers' lives as long as they lived. Let's go back to our story. Let's pick it up in verse 25, Genesis 37, verse 25. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brothers and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And by the way, that is a very small amount of money. The brothers thought they were in control of Joseph's life, but they were not. God was in control. He knew the plans he had for Joseph, and it was not time for Joseph to die. God preserved his life. God intervened. It just so happened that this caravan was walking by at the right time. A group of merchants who were gathering products to take back to Egypt and sell. And that's when the brothers saw their opportunity. They could get rid of Joseph without killing him and even make a little bit of money on the side. And they sold him to the merchants. And I'm sure the brothers thought they had solved their problem. No Joseph, no more pain. With Joseph gone, so would be their pain. Dad would suddenly start being a good father and begin loving them. They probably thought this would remove their guilt and shame, but it didn't. They were wrong on every point. Pride pathway never heals us. It never meets our needs. It never turns out well. Going against God's way never makes our life better, only worse. And what they didn't know is that they would carry around the shame and guilt of selling Joseph the rest of their lives. The boys then killed a goat. They splattered that special coat with goat's blood, took it back home, and told Jacob wild animals must have killed their brother. Jacob was destroyed, and all joy slipped out of his life. With Joseph gone, still not ready to learn from his mistakes. Boy, Jacob is a hard case. Still not ready to see that his false idols could never save him. Jacob simply appointed Benjamin as that special person who would meet all his needs. His last remaining son by his beloved wife, Rachel. And what about Joseph? His last view of his homeland was from the back of a camel headed to Egypt. He would never again live there. He would never see his home again. And it would be 22 years before he ever saw his family again. This was his longest list of losses to date, and perhaps even more painful than losing his mother. While it's true, losing his mom would have been a devastating loss for Joseph, Joseph knew he had his mother's love. Rachel didn't choose to leave her son. She didn't want to die. She didn't want that to happen. She didn't betray him or reject him, but that's exactly what his brothers did. They wanted him to die. They wanted to reject him. They wanted to abandon him, and those are extremely painful wounds, whatever direction they come from. Joseph lost his family, the safety and protection of his father. He lost his home again, this time forever. He lost his Jewish culture, his dreams for the future, his freedom, because now he's a slave. He's not a free man anymore. And he lost contact with his family. As I said, it'd be a long time before he saw them again. We're going to stop our story for today. Joseph isn't even old enough to vote, but he has experienced a lifetime's worth of pain and suffering. Next week, we're going to pick up the story where we left off as we look at his adult years and the healing process that God took Joseph through. The story has a happy ending, but it's a bit of a journey for Joseph. Before I go, I want to read one more verse, Acts 7, 9-10. Because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. But God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. I don't know how you see it at this point, but it doesn't really look much like God rescued Joseph, does it, at this point in the story? He's only 17 years old and he's lost everything. We'll come back next week and find out what happens to Joseph. So in your daily journey steps this week, you are going to come across your second beliefs worksheet. The first one was on God's character. This one is going to be on our relationship with God. It's so valuable to give your quality time to discovering what your beliefs are, which ones are true, which ones are false, evaluating your beliefs, because your beliefs affect every part of your life. So I hope you enjoy working on this new one. I'll give you a moment to finish your statement at the bottom of your outline. The thing that impacted me from today's lesson is, all right, did you get those blanks all filled in? Does anybody have a question about the lesson or any of the blanks or comments? Go ahead and fill out your statement.
Blank on
Do you have one for yourself?
9-3 number 7.
Let me just peek at it.